Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Eliana Kernodle. Joining me today is Pennsylvania editor Kristen Smith. How are you, Kristen?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Today we are talking about a letter that car dealers from all around the country signed and sent to the Biden administration about electric vehicles and his proposed electric vehicle mandate. Can you tell us more about this?
Sure. About almost 3 months ago now, back in November of 23, 4,500 car dealerships signed onto a letter, including 85 in Pennsylvania, and that number has grown since November, telling Biden essentially yeah, we're very excited to sell these electric vehicles. They're great and everything, but we just have too many of them and demand has not caught up with the supply that we have. And so that's an interesting point because of some of the targets that have been set for the transition to EVs. I think the federal government would like the target to be EVs to account for more than half of all new vehicle sales by 2030. Other states have taken steps to ban traditional gas-powered vehicles altogether by 2035. So we're not that far away in terms of this 2030 target, let alone 2035. And it just seems like from their perspective, as much as they want to sell them, the customer isn't buying.
Some of these dealers have talked to lawmakers before about their concerns here. How do they feel that lawmakers have been understanding this situation?
So Mickey Anderson, who is president and CEO of Baxter Auto Group, he owns 21 dealerships in Lincoln, Nebraska, Omaha, the greater Kansas City area, Colorado Springs, Madison, Wisconsin. He's the spearhead of this letter, let's say. And so he's not only talked to other dealers, but to government officials as well. And he said that they've just completely misunderstood the demand for EVs. A lot of the customers that he speaks with are worried about not only the cost, but reliable charging networks, electric grid stability, just things that the market hasn't yet quite figured out. And experts as far as the green energy transition more broadly have said, it's a great idea, but we just can't rush blindly towards these targets because the infrastructure is not in place. And so this is just another symptom of that, is people feeling nervous to switch over. Something that's also been underestimated too is although EVs aren't as popular with the consumer as perhaps the administration would like to see, hybrid vehicles are more popular than they've ever been. So there is that sense among consumers they want to start making that switch. It's just they can't trust that the EVs are meeting their needs yet.
So how does Anderson feel about the approach that lawmakers have been taking? And does he have any perspective on what he feels like would be a better approach to the situation?
He has some strong words for this entire issue. He said that it's a great injustice to make Americans pay taxes that are used, in his words, to force an agenda that would deprive them of affordable and useful cars and require them to buy ones that are unaffordable and far less useful for their needs. And he says that every time I think about that, I feel like it's asking someone to go dig their own grave. From his perspective, it would be more beneficial to take that taxpayer money and invest it in a bunch of green energy technologies and other technologies that would reduce the carbon footprint. And doing so would help increase demand for things like EVs and other products that we can buy that would help with the carbon footprint. And things would sell naturally and you wouldn't have to have government subsidies. So he thinks that a lot of this is the problem in its own making. It's things that critics warned about, and now they're coming into fruition. He makes another interesting metaphor about what the government is doing here. He said, if the government were to mandate that Chick-fil-A was going to sell, if they were going to make 2/3 of their sandwiches to become a vegetarian substitute, well, they could do that, but most of their customers coming through are going to still order chicken sandwiches. So you're just going to have a bunch of vegetarian substitute sandwiches just piling up in Chick-fil-A, and no one's going to want them. And he's like, that's exactly what's happening with EVs. He gave us a stat that was kind of interesting and illuminating as far as the demand here. He said that while he is sitting on a 200-day supply of electric vehicles, he has a year-long wait for the Toyota Prius, for example. So again, it's just a complete imbalance in supply and demand.
Yeah, and that's very interesting that hybrids are a more sustainable option than a combustion engine, even if it's not the same as an EV, but there's significantly more demand for that, but there doesn't seem to be the same policy push behind them.
No, there's not. And the support for hybrids harkens back to something that we see more broadly again with the clean energy transition, and that is the reliability of gas and fossil fuels versus the environmental impact and improvement that hybrids and electric vehicles are. I think most consumers want to move in that direction. Who wants to pay for gas anymore these days, right? But they don't have, for example, they don't have the charging infrastructure at their own house, let alone in reliable places when they're traveling in order to make that reality. Hybrid vehicles kind of offer the best of both worlds. They're moving them away from gas dependence, but those vehicles can still be used for long haul, road trips, for people who live in areas with mixed terrain. They don't have to worry as much about range that they would with electric vehicles because they have that gas power too. So that I think is an insight into where the consumer is, wanting to move forward, but feeling that the technology can't support their lifestyle yet.
So it's been, like you said, about 3 months since they sent this letter, and people have continued to sign on to it. Has there been any response from the Biden administration?
Anderson says no. All that he's gotten back from them is that they received the letter. So there's been no response whatsoever.
Well, thank you for your insights on this story. That's all the time we have today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Kristen Smith, I'm Eliana Kernodle. Please subscribe, and thank you for listening. Enjoying our podcast? Your reviews help other listeners find our show. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen.